Blessed is the one who's made us holy with mitzvot and commanded us to engage in words of Torah. So this week, actually, I was looking at a book of Jewish mystical tales, Gabriel's Palace, selected and retold by Howard Schwartz, and came across a couple tales which actually have something to say connect with the observances we are moving in upon, and a little about today's Parsha. This tale begins on one day in the brief study period between the afternoon and the evening prayers, between Mincha and Mariv. Reb Pinchas of Koretz was discussing a passage from the Zohar with his Hasidim. Hasidic Rabbi discussing a passage from the Zohar. He noted that each drash from the Zohar, each midrash, began with the words, Rabbi Shimon patach. Rabbi Shimon opened the verse, or opened with the verse. Reb Pinchas said, this is generally understood to mean that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai opened his lecture, but it does not. It means that he literally opened the verse of the Torah. That particular tale goes on, but the point that came to my mind had first of all to do with this week's Parsha, where the verses often for us certainly need to be opened up. It's not only in the Zohar where that expression is, it's many midrashim where it says the rabbi or the teacher opened the verse, opened with the verse. But when we read verses of Torah, we need to open the verses and open ourselves. We need to elicit meaning from the verses, and we need to elicit meaning from our lives and put them into the verses. That is the method of Midrash. And in Parshat Tzav, which is what we're reading this week, beginning in Leviticus chapter 6, we read much about the various sacrifices and the rituals in the temple. And for many moderns, that might mean this Parsha is pretty much irrelevant to us. But our Torah tradition works by opening up verses to find meaning within the verses, and also to fill verses with meaning from our own lives in order to pass meaning down within the tradition to future generations. It is instructional to note, by the way, that the Mishnah, the earliest part of the Talmud, and from around the year 200, and the section of the teaching that we also read just before the Baruch Hu was a section of Mishnah. Again, the Mishnah is believed to have been compiled around the year 200 CE, the beginning of the 3rd century. But when you look at the Mishnah, a full 1/3 of the Mishnah, 2 of the 6 orders or 6 sections of the Mishnah are about the practice that existed in the temple. Yet the temple was destroyed by the Romans and therefore stopped functioning a century and a half earlier, in the year 70 CE, in the 1st century. Even though the temple practice no longer existed at the time of the compilation of the Mishnah, the practices of the temple were still being examined for meaning. Maybe because they were no longer practiced, they were therefore remembered and recorded in detail. The point is, though, that they contained much meaning that needed to be conveyed. In our case, in Parshat Tzav, describing underlying commandments and commitments to temple worship, we learn much from this Parsha about the nature of devotional practice and how we together as community participate in prayer and devotional practice with each other. We learn about the timing of the sacrifices, which to this day is the basis of the timing of our 3 daily services and the additional or Musaf services of the Shabbat and festivals, in deference to the Musaf or additional sacrifices offered on those days. Yes, there were two. There was a morning sacrifice and an afternoon sacrifice, and then the fire burned in the evening. And so we have a morning service where we repeat the Amidah, and an afternoon service, and then in the evening service we don't repeat the Amidah. We learn that a fire must be kept continuously burning on the altar every hour of every day, presumably as a symbol of the people of Israel's ongoing commitment to devotion, and as a sign of God's continuous presence among the people of Israel. The rabbis also open up the verses to meaning around the question of how the entire people participate in these practices, whoever they are, wherever they are, even if they usually are nowhere around the temple. In the conversations and the commentaries around the Torah verses, the rabbis since the time of the Pharisees teach that delegations should come from surrounding villages throughout the land for a week at a time to be present for the sacrifices, and that people, various people, individuals themselves, all the people, should participate in collecting and bringing wood to fuel the fire. That should never go out on the altar. So everyone is participating somehow and connecting to this devotional practice. The practice in the temple is an instance of communal worship for all time, embodying the prayers of all of us. Perhaps in the synagogues throughout the Jewish world when the temple stood, perhaps in synagogues as the temple stood, Jews recited prayers connecting the scattered Jewish communities to the sacrifices taking place at the temple in those moments. Certainly, in synagogues around the world now, we continue to say prayers connecting ourselves to the temple prayers and sacrifices that were said. In that way, making our prayers a continuation of ongoing devotion that took place in the temple. Just listen to the words from our own Siddur, which we just recited. And this prayer begins on page 99, but I'll tell you the words. It is translated as, "Take pleasure, gracious one, our God, in Israel your people. Lovingly accept their fervent prayer." The Hebrew actually says, "Retzei Adonai Elokeinu be'amcha Yisrael v'lahav tefilatam be'ahava tekabel," which more precisely means, accept, Adonai our God, your people Israel, and accept with love the flame of their prayer. The flame of their prayer. This connects our prayers to the flame on the altar. And the end of that bracha, the end of that blessing is Baruch atah hamachazir shchinato l'tzion, who causes your Shekhinah, causes God's Shekhinah, God's presence, to return to Zion. In every single Amidah that is recited, connecting our prayers to the prayers in the temple in Jerusalem. There is a Hasidic story which illustrates how the flame of devotion can pass down from one generation to another, even when the form of that devotion changes. It's one of the stories that I came across this week, or I was reminded of. Here's the story. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, always knew if his prayers had ascended on high, as most of them did. But once in a while, a prayer would somehow be lost. And he would go out to a particular place. He would go out to a particular place in the forest, and he would light a fire. and he would recite a prayer, and he would know that this prayer had been received. Years later, his disciple, Dov Ber, also known as the Magid of Mezrich, the Magid, the storyteller, the teller of Mezrich, faced another grave danger for the community, with the community of Israel, a danger concerning the blood libel, which we can talk about later. Ask me. And the Magid knew what to do. He went to his friend, Reb Moshe Leib of Sasov, and led him into the forest to this secret place that the Baal Shem Tov would go to. But he did not know how to light the fire. But he remembered the prayer. So in that place, he said the prayer, and he knew the prayer had been accepted and the danger had passed. The next generation, Reb Moshe Leib of Sasov, was himself called upon to fulfill a great task concerning the redemption of a great many captives. And yes, there is a mitzvah, a commandment of securing the release of captives. So many times in our history, we've had peoples around us who have taken captives from our community and held them for ransom. And it is considered a mitzvah, a commandment to gain the release of the captives. And Reb Moshe Leib went into the forest. He did not know how to light the fire. He did not know the prayer, but at least he knew the place. And that proved to be enough. And when the time came in the next generation for Reb Israel of Rizhin to perform the task, he told his Hasidim, he told his followers, we cannot light the fire. We don't know the words of the prayer. And we've forgotten the place. But we can tell the story. He told the story. And it was enough. This story illustrates how the power of telling story itself can be a means by which that chain of devotion is passed down. And perhaps that's why the Mishnah spends so much time describing the practice in the temple, even though it was a century and a half earlier. And I'll conclude tonight by noting that we are about to enter into the festival of Pesach, the festival of Passover. And on Passover, we gather together for Seders, and we recite at the Seders, we recite the Haggadah. And Haggadah, that's the text that we recite at the Seder. And the Haggadah, the word Haggadah means telling. From the word lahagid, to tell. We are telling the story of the Exodus. And we are remembering the story of the fellowships that gathered at the temple and offered the prescribed Pesach sacrifice. And the commandment accompanying the Pesach sacrifice is that when your children ask, you will tell them. So what do we have the youngest one who is capable? What do we have the youngest one do? Ask the questions. And then we can tell them. And the Haggadah means telling. It is in telling the story that we convey the experience, the memory, and the lesson of the experience, and the commitment and the devotion. That is also why the Seder is not the shortest of ceremonies. The Seder is to be long enough for us to be able to open up the sentences, into the meaning that they convey to us and that they elicit from us. It's why it said that those who linger on the story of the Exodus from Egypt are to be praised. We ponder what it means to come out of Egypt, not only then and there, but here and now. We ponder what it means to come out of Egypt in every generation. We say that in every generation a Pharaoh arises against us. And we say each of us should think of ourselves as if we each personally came out of Egypt. Some families add to the story of the Haggadah, telling about the experiences of their own family in more recent generations, escaping oppression. I knew families that were survivors from the Holocaust. They would tell their family story at the Seder, in addition to coming out of Egypt. It was the same, right? Mitzrayim, Egypt. Mitzarim, the narrow places. Egypt is the narrow place. We're coming out of the places that squeeze us into a wider place, the wilderness, that wide desert wilderness where we're still disoriented. It's not over. The people just want to go back. And in telling the story at the Seder, we need to remember to sit with the words long enough to allow this meaning to emerge, to elicit this meaning. That is what is meant by the story in the Haggadah of discussing the coming out of Egypt until it is time to say the morning Shema. That story isn't there just for no reason. And when we wash our hands at the Seder, in the midst of the Seder, twice, just before the karpas, the dipping of the greens, and just before the motzi, the eating of the matzah, it is reminiscent of the way the priests would wash their hands in the temple before sacrifice. So we are symbolically raising our Seder table to the level of an altar. The forms are different, but the devotion is the same. It is still the same flame of devotion that burned in the temple. The fire on the altar still burns. Shabbat Shalom, and a Zisen Pesach, a sweet Pesach.